So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon to talk to you about GL assessment, non-verbal reasoning. That's the topic area we're going to be focusing on. I'm going to share my slides now so you can all see the things we're going through. We did send out a booklet last week for you to download and have a look at. A lot of the questions will be on the screen, so you should be able to follow it hopefully. And as I said at the beginning, if there are any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to ask. So let's first of all, I suppose, talk about what is non-verbal reasoning. And I'm sure you all know this, but non-verbal reasoning is about shapes and patterns. It's very much a form of assessment for students who potentially don't need to have any language skills, and you can still ascertain their kind of ability level by getting children to work through various different question types that involve children looking at similarities and differences, spotting patterns, and there are a variety of different question types that GL assessment set. What we tend to feel at Teach It Right is that we will cover all those different styles of questions. The ones that actually come up in terms of the ones that GL will draw upon, obviously we don't know that, but we do have an understanding over the last few years, and certainly since 2018, when GL assessment came back into the authority, an understanding of the question types they have actually used. Now, when I talk about non-verbal reasoning this afternoon, I really will be referring to question types that are flat on the page rather than spatial reasoning questions. And we will have an opportunity this afternoon to actually look at some spatial reasoning as well. But to start with, we are actually going to focus on non-verbal reasoning in terms of two-dimensional question types. Now, what we've done is we've actually categorized these questions into these three areas, as you can see on the screen. So similarities and differences, pairs, series and grids, and we'll also be looking at codes. I do feel with non-verbal reasoning, and certainly when we teach it to children potentially for the first time, particularly if they haven't done it within their own schooling, that we do very much treat them like puzzles. And I want children to think of them like puzzles. And I think certainly there's a lot of enjoyment out of these questions. It does rely on practice. It does rely on that rehearsal. I think a child who goes into an exam who has never done non-verbal before, because of the time that it might take to actually understand what they've got to do, and because it is a timed exam, often they will struggle to do well in non-verbal reasoning. Those children who have had that familiarity, had an opportunity to practice these questions, obviously tend to do much, much better. And I think certainly with children looking at it for the first time, we introduce it through a mnemonic. Now, we really do feel with this mnemonic that it actually covers off any non-verbal question that a child would be doing. And we teach them this right at the beginning. So if they join us in year 4 or they join us at the beginning of year 5, we actually ensure that this becomes very much routine, that they know this mnemonic really, really well. And that's actually going to be our starting point, guys, this afternoon. We are actually going to have a look at this mnemonic and talk about what it represents, what those variables are, and this is certainly something that you can also ensure that your child really knows and understands at home as well. I'm sure you're all familiar with mnemonics. The most common one I always talk about is because. So big elephants can always understand small elephants was how I was taught to learn how to spell because. But we've got our own then for non-verbal reasoning. And as you can see here, there's a child here holding up a pair of soggy socks, and there is a reason for that, and I'll explain that in a moment. But these are the properties that children need to look for. So when they're presented with a question, they can go through this series of different variables, and generally one of those will work for that particular question. What we tend to find is that the more complex the question, the more variables it will actually use. So I think that's important to recognize as well, that a question that is seen to be maybe a higher level, that might involve 3 or 4 properties that the child has to consider. So let's have a little look at what this mnemonic stands for. I'm just admitting people as they come in. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you can all access the booklet that you were sent, but certainly everything will be on the slides this afternoon. And as I did say, if you've got any questions, just don't hesitate to put them in the chat and I can see them as we go along. Some people are having a little bit of a problem getting in, but hopefully you can all hear me and see me. So this mnemonic, let's have a look at it from the start. So we've got S, that stands for shape. And we'll look at these more individually as we go along. P stands for position, the position of the shape. Angle, and this is maybe a less common variable that children need to look for. Number, and I often talk to children about not forgetting to count things up, whether that be the number of shapes, the number of sides, the number of corners. That's really important. Size, shading, rotation, overlapping, and symmetry. And you might be wondering why there's a rotten orange there as well. Well, the way that we get children to remember this is we say, silly people always need soggy socks. Sometimes children can make up one of their own if they want to. So silly people always need soggy socks. And then the last 3 words is rotten oranges smell, hence the illustration there of an orange. Now, just by going through those 9 words that are there, as I said at the beginning, any non-verbal reasoning question that is presented to the children, those are the variables that they will need to consider. And I think it's quite important, particularly for children starting out on non-verbal reasoning, to think, well, what do I need to look at? What are the things that could possibly change? Or what are some of the similarities that I need to look for? Now, we're just going to spend a little bit of time going through each of those words in turn, because I think it's very important before we delve into any questions or I show you any questions this afternoon, that we actually... We've got a bit of an echo going on there. Don't know if that is somebody's... All right, hopefully that's gone away. So just having a little look at those individual variables will hopefully get us to understand how that does apply to something like non-verbal reasoning. So first one was shape. Now, you probably would feel that your child knows all of their 2D shapes. Sometimes it does get a little bit more advanced in terms of looking at things like heptagons, octagons, nonagons, decagons. And I think it is important that children do know those more advanced shapes as well, because non-verbal reasoning writers will use a variety of different shapes. Some of them may be regular shapes, some of them may be irregular shapes, but just knowing those is really important. One of the things that we know is really valuable within the lessons is that children can explain how they've achieved an answer. Now, when you're dealing with non-verbal, the differences can be quite subtle. So the difference between a pentagon and a hexagon is really important, because if you're talking about a 5-sided shape or a 6-sided shape, that could make a difference to the answer that you arrive at. So one of the things our tutors value hugely is not only children being able to get the right answer, but also being able to explain it as well. So one of the things we will develop as the years go on, whether they be, I say, year 4 or year 5 children, is ensure that they've got that vocabulary, because the vocabulary related to non-verbal is really important, because if a child can't articulate how they've got an answer, we'll never really be able to get around their understanding. So that's really important. If you have just joined me, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. We're just going through our mnemonic that we teach children at the beginning of the course, certainly both for year 4 and year 5. Now, position is important, where those shapes are positioned. Now, I've just put a question type here, which I thought was worth just having a little chat about, really to illustrate that point around position. So what we've got to do here, we've got a series of shapes, and one of these shapes belongs with this group at the top. And really, just to emphasize how important position is, first of all, we know that we've got circles, so we're looking at the shape, of course. So therefore, I'm going to eliminate C, because I know it's only very subtle, but you can see that's an oval rather than a circle. And then if you look at these little shapes that are attached to the circles, each one of them, and if I maybe just get a little circle here to highlight it, every single one has got one vertex or one corner actually touching that circle. So the position is really important. So I'm going to eliminate that one, because as you can see, it's got 2, This one's actually overlapping. Again, it's only only a very small overlap, but you can just about work that out. Now, whenever you're left with two options, I tend to compare those first and say, well, why are you different? And as you can see here, that's got 2 points touching the circle. We only want it to have one, so therefore the answer is E. Now, one of the things you'll notice that I was doing when I was going through that question is I was actually crossing things out. And the reason for that was to limit the choices that I had. This is a multiple choice section. So when children do non-verbal reasoning, whether that be for GL or CEM, then they will have options. They will have the answer options to choose from. And if a child has managed to remove some of those options, of course, the obvious thing to say is, well, they're limiting their choices. So if they are left with two and they go for one and it's a little bit of a guess, then actually they've got a far better chance of picking up that mark. So actually eliminating and crossing out the wrong ones is one of their, I suppose, greatest strategies, if you like, in terms of when they're answering non-verbal questions. So that's just to illustrate position. And you can see, as I say, that the position of those shapes is obviously really important. Angle, as I said at the beginning, excuse me, is less common because it's sort of quite hard to relate it directly to angle. But one of the things that we do want children to be aware of is how shapes can rotate through different degrees. So do they know 180 degrees, 90 degrees, 45, 135 degrees, 270 degrees? And actually in the classroom, we often do this actually as a very simple game where you ask children to stand up, face you, and turn anti-clockwise 45 degrees or clockwise, just to give them an idea of how the angles can change. This particular question, I suppose, does illustrate it from a sort of a 90-degree perspective, because the way that we would work these questions out is we've got two shapes on the left. One of these shapes belongs with those two on the left. Now, the first thing to recognize is you've got three rectangles of differing sizes, and you've got to find the one that is similar to that group or belongs in that group. But I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that two of them do create a right angle. So you've got this one here and this one here. They're sort of perpendicular, if you like, to each other. That one's also perpendicular as well. So that's going to be important. So in actual fact, B can be eliminated because of that reason. And then if we look at E, that also doesn't generate any right angle between those rectangles either. The next thing to consider is how they bisect. So what I mean by that is actually how they are overlapping each other. So the first thing to realize is that the little rectangle always goes right the way through the longer one, and the same with the sort of middle-sized rectangle, if you like. So I can rule out A because this rectangle doesn't go across or doesn't bisect the longer one. Now I'm left with two. Now remember what I said earlier, once you are down to two options, it's worth having a look at the difference. And you can see here, look, that this rectangle, if I just do an outline, doesn't bisect the longer one here. So therefore I can remove that one, and I've only got one answer left, which we know is right because those two do go across. So you can see that the link between angle can sometimes be a bit tenuous, but you can see that that's one way of looking at it from an angle perspective. Next part of the mnemonic is number. And at the beginning, I mentioned that sometimes this is one that children can forget, counting up the number of shapes or the number of sides. And both these questions do relate to number. So just very quickly, just so we can have a look and identify how it relates. When you're given a number of objects like this, a child would not be expected to count them all up. And the reason being, there are a lot of them. Now, you can imagine with most non-verbal reasoning questions, children are expected to do them in, say, 20 seconds or so. So the expectation here wouldn't be to count every single one up. But what you might have noticed, if you think of it as consecutive numbers, we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4. So these are odd ones out. So D must be the odd one out because, of course, those numbers are not consecutive. Now, when you're presented with a question like that, the first thing the children might have looked at is the shapes. They might have considered the position. Obviously, angle doesn't help, but then they get to arrive at number. Right, maybe I do need to think about how that might work in terms of number. But when you are presented with, like in A, where you've got 13 or 14 shapes, no, you wouldn't be expected to count every single one of those. The second example that I've put here, I think, is probably one of the most important things to consider when you're looking at number, and that's the relationship between shapes. Now, we see a variety of these questions coming into the 11+ exams where they are relying on children working out a relationship between potentially shapes inside and something happening on the outside. So just very quickly here, you can see that you've got 5 points on this star here, and there are 2 circles inside. On this one, I've got 4, and then I've got 3, so there's only 1 less. This one, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there are 5 inside, so again 1 less, 5 here, and then 4 inside. So the odd one out here will actually be A, because the difference is more than 1. So again, you can see that actually the relationship between shapes is something they're also testing children on as well. And we do see, as I said, lots of questions like that particular style. So that's number. And the next one is shading. Now, unfortunately, children are always very disappointed with non-verbal, that it only sort of appears in grey, black, and white. And that, often say, oh, why can't we have more colours involved? But I'm afraid that is the way that the questions are presented to children. They don't use a variety of colours. They tend to just focus on black, grey, or white. But what they can do is vary things like line type, the way that they actually shade things in. And as you can see on this illustration here, there are a number of ways of shading shapes. You can do it whereby you fill them in completely. You can have different types of lines. We often talk about hatching or lattice patterns. And then you can have your sort of irregular patterns and also spotted patterns as well. One of the reasons I've actually covered up the line style was I thought we could do a quick little activity together here, where I hope you've all got pencil, or even a pen will be okay for this. And wanted you to have a go at drawing as many different lines as you possibly can. And underneath my boxes are lots of different styles of lines, and wanted to see how many you could come up with. So if I could just give you 30 seconds or so on a bit of paper, draw as many different types of line as you possibly can. Thanks to those people who are having a go in the chat and answering some of the questions. That's lovely. We'll certainly have some this afternoon where you can have a go and type the answers in the chat and give them a go. And may have heard me say at the beginning that practice does make perfect with non-verbal. So a couple more seconds to draw as many lines as you possibly can, and as many line styles as you can. And you'll see how this will relate to a lot of non-verbal reasoning. Once you feel you've kind of exhausted all your different line styles, count them up, see how many you've managed to draw, and then in the chat, just put how many different line styles you have, and we'll see whether we can get a winner from the group. Right, everyone, I think that's probably enough time. Can I ask you in the chat feed, if you're feeling brave, put in how many styles of line you have managed. Very good. 5, 6, 7, someone. Very, very good. See if we got any higher. 7, 5, 6. Another one was 6. Oh, someone's managed to do 12. That is mightily impressive. We might have to sound that person out and get them to show us. That's a very impressive number of lines. 7, 9. Fantastic. Getting some really good numbers there. Super. Anyone else want to pose their number? But I can see there, I think 12 is probably the highest. I wonder if I can be brave, Kenneth, and actually pick on you in that regard. Would you mind just basically telling us the different ones that you've managed to draw? Oh yeah, sorry, you have to unmute yourself first.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, Kenneth. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. I just tried so different lines and some straight, vertical, different angle, horizontal, and all that, so different. Just come out.
Yeah, and I probably actually
someone with patterns as well. So.
Yeah, and actually there are probably just so many ways of doing it, aren't there? Particularly when you start getting quite creative with the lines where, you know, for example, you might have a dash, you might then do 2 dots, you might have a dash, you might have 2 dots, and then, there are so many different ways of presenting it. If we look at some of the standard ways, but well done for coming up with so many. Let's have a little look and reveal. So what I think is probably a good idea here, everyone, is just to see, did I actually get that one as part of my list? So we've got a solid line, which is often very common within nonverbal, and sometimes that can vary in thickness as well. So it can be made a bit bolder, a bit like what they've got there at the end. So a solid line. A dash line, which I have to admit is different from a dotted line. So when we're talking about dashes, that's more of a dash line. But then when I'm talking about a dotted line, we're talking about that. Now, I think that's important to recognize again, just the variances in nonverbal and how subtle they can be. And then they've mentioned here about the thin and the thick. So just along there, we've got 5 types of line. And then here are some more examples that for the ones of you that got a little bit more creative, you may well have got a curved line, of course. We've got other styles here where we've sort of got a line, but they've included an arrowhead on it. We've also got lines overlapping other lines, a sort of an S shape, an M, a zigzag line, which I'm sure you've probably included in your set as well. So just, again, a very simple activity that you can do with your child, because just getting an understanding of the different types of line style that can be used in nonverbal all aids their understanding. So let's move on now to the next part of the mnemonic. And the next thing we're just going to very briefly talk about is size. Of course, shapes can vary in size. And this is something that they do need to look out for, have the shapes being varied. This one is very, very simple. And in actual fact, doesn't necessarily relate directly to size. It's actually more about the order of the shapes. So you've got a large, a medium, and a small. But you've probably noticed here, this one goes medium, large, small. So if you were looking at as the odd one out, then the size here is not going from large to medium to small on the overlap. But again, just trying to find those links sometimes between the mnemonic and question types that come up is sometimes quite difficult. But you can see there how size can be important. Next part of the mnemonic is rotation. How does a shape rotate? I've actually included this as an example of rotation, but you can see that it's an everyday object. Very often with nonverbal non-verbal reasoning in the actual exam, that wouldn't be the case. They're not going to use everyday objects to represent the question. So, but I thought just from a point of view of rotation, just showing you what could happen here. Children sometimes find these very difficult, just because they struggle to visualize what happens when a shape is actually rotated. We do tend to do different things in the lessons with our students to illustrate this, and particularly those tutors that use smartboard slides or use a PowerPoint. And I know Mrs. Hobden often does this, where, if I can just get this image up for you. So there's the key that we've got there on the left-hand side. And if we get hold of it and rotate it, you can see very clearly, of course, the only one that is the same is C. And just having that, so, you know, children could actually see, okay, if it goes that way, well, no, I can never make it look like A. Likewise with B, it doesn't matter which way I rotate it, I can never make it look like it is in B. Same with D here. Again, if I'm rotating it, I can't make it look like that shape. And likewise with E as well, it doesn't matter what I do. And children quite enjoy that, particularly when they can then oh, right, it's a bit of a light bulb moment sometimes when they actually see what happens when it does rotate. The next thing to talk to you about is overlapping. This is, again, very common. You've already seen it a little bit in some of the questions we've been looking at. So with overlapping, we can overlap in various different ways. But one of the common things that they like doing is overlapping shapes and then shading part of the shape that has overlapped with another one. This one I thought was quite difficult, actually. I've put it in there because I think it really shows that with a lot of questions, they use what are called distractors. And these are things that are put into the question to distract children from what they actually need to look at. Now, you might be thinking, right, do I need to think about the shapes? Do I need to think about, for example, how many shapes are the same maybe in this one? But in actual fact, the answer to this one is based on which ones are actually shaded on the overlap. So if you look at this, we've got a bold shade here on the left, then a white, bold on the left, white on the right, bold, and then white again. And then we've got bold and then white. But if you look at E very carefully, if you look at this oval here, and you see that bit that's overlapping, that's actually white, and that part is actually black. So the answer to that one is E. Now, we do require children with questions like that to be able to sort of systematically go through their mnemonic and think, right, have I checked shape? Have I checked position? Have I checked angle? And this enables them, hopefully, eventually, to get to a variable that works. Some children, though, will identify questions very quickly, and they don't need to go through a process of using that mnemonic. Some of our students will spot things and then be able to move on to the next question, and they don't need a methodology, if you like. Nonverbal reasoning is often talked about as, is it an innate trait? Are children either sort of very good at nonverbal reasoning, or actually is it something that they're not very good at and they've really got to practice to get better? My view is if you practice something, you will get better at it. But we certainly know there are some children, particularly with things like rotation, that are able to do things visually. They can see where a shape's going to move and what's going to happen with that pattern a lot quicker than others. We are nearly at the end of the mnemonic. We've only got one more word that we're going to concentrate on, and that is symmetry. And with symmetry, the questions that involve symmetry will often, of course, use a dashed line to show symmetry. This one's quite an interesting one because it's sort of mixed up dotted lines, or dashed lines, I should say, and also double bold lines. The answer to this one is actually B. And the reason being, if we were to actually focus on the double line, that's a line of symmetry, that's a line of symmetry, that's a line of symmetry, so is that, but that one, of course, will not be. So we do talk to children about symmetry because it can come up. Not very common, but it is a variable to certainly look at as well. So that draws us to the end of the mnemonic. If I just could go back just to remind you on what we looked at. So those words are the words that we know apply to any 2D question type, any non-verbal reasoning ones. If you did arrive a little bit later to this workshop, we are going to be looking at two-dimensional questions this afternoon, but we will also concentrate on spatial reasoning as well. Now, within GL assessment, there's a lot of question types that are 2D, things like odd ones out, matrices, sequences, but there are also spatial reasoning questions as well. So we've kind of divided this workshop in half this afternoon, just so we can cover off all those different question types. Now, if you're very keen to get involved now, we are going to be presenting some questions to you to have a go at, and you can type them in the chat, give them a go. I always do feel, certainly when children work through non-verbal reasoning at home, they absolutely love it if mum and dad has a little go as well with them, and you can practice those questions with them, see if you can get them right, and it sort of bit of empathy, but it also puts you in their shoes in terms of what they're trying to work through. So let's have a look at some actual question types. This is called Find the Shape Which is Most Alike. There are questions that could have two shapes on the left, or they may only have, three questions, or three figures rather, on the left-hand side. They can use both. It's, as I say, just depends on which one they select in that particular year. But the way that we want children to solve these questions is by having a look at the three shapes on the left and identifying why they're similar. Now, the interesting thing here is it's a relationship one. So the number of lines represents the number of sides on the big shape. So we've got 3, 3, 4, 4. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want a child writing the numbers down. They probably haven't got time, but it just illustrates to you just the relationship there. And the reason I've crossed through the other ones is because obviously they're not the correct ones to go with that group on the left. The answer is E, because I've got 5 sides and I've got 5 lines. All the others don't fit that criteria. When you are given 3 shapes on the left, there may be more than one thing to look at. Now, if I'm being honest, that question type is quite easy. That probably wouldn't be one they would get in their actual 11 plus test. So the level of questions, as you can imagine, and certainly why we use when we use the CGP books, they sort of start with 8 to 9, they go to 9 to 10, they go 10 to 11. Thankfully, they don't get any harder than that, but it is just to show you the progression of question types. So I've got one here that maybe is slightly more challenging than the one you've just seen. And I wondered whether you wouldn't mind having a go at that one. So see if you can work out of the 5 options, which shape belongs with the 3 on the left. If you're feeling brave and confident, type the answer in the chat. So remember, do focus on different things. It may not just be one thing you need to look at. When you've got an answer, you think you know, put it in the chat. Excellent. We've got an answer already. I won't tell you whether it's the right one yet, but let's see if anyone else can have a go. Which of those shapes belongs with those 3 on the left? And also, just from a point of view of strategy, then actually ruling out the ones that you know it can't be can really help. Got 2 responses so far. Anyone else brave enough just to type it in the chat? Which one do you think belongs with the 3 on the left? Oh, someone else has given me the answer. Brilliant. Okay, everyone, let's have a little chat about it. Well done to those people that put an answer in the chat. I will just say all of those people that did put an answer are correct. So why are these three, I always like to say to the children, why are they all in the same family? What's similar about them? So if we look at the little ovals that we've got there, they always overlap a corner. And that is something that you can very quickly say, well, okay, if it doesn't overlap a corner, I can eliminate it. So B can go, because you can see this one's on a side. I'm going to eliminate that one because that one's on a side. That one's okay, and that's okay. So that's one thing that I've concentrated on. Remember I said earlier, the harder the question, the more things we need to think about. So the other thing here is that we've got the black triangles that are created within those pentagons or hexagons or octagon. So if it's a quadrilateral, so that would be a quadrilateral there, like a trapezium, and a trapezium there as well. So it does leave us again with the right answer, and there's the triangle that we needed. You can see, can't you, that sometimes children might be drawn to sort of go for an answer because of one thing. So if they were to find one example where they know the ovals overlap the corner, they might go, oh, that's the answer. But what they've got to think about is, if they are left with other options, to double check those as well. Children can be quite impulsive. They can go, oh, it's that one. And then you say, well, actually, have you spent time having a look at the other ones? And then they do, and then they maybe eventually find the right answer. So I think when you're watching your child do nonverbal, see if they're quite methodical, see if they actually apply a bit of a process. Are they looking at every answer option? Or are they sort of, I often talk about sort of having a bath. And when you have a bath, you kind of dip your toe in. You don't jump straight in and get burnt. You kind of dip your toe in and you think, actually, I better check each one first. And I think that's a really important message to give you, to relay to your children. We will do, of course, the same within the lessons about checking each of the answer options. Thank you very much for having a go at that one. Within your booklet, there are 4 more for you to have a look at. I don't know necessarily whether we've got time to go through every single one of these, but I wanted to show you these mainly because you can see there's a subtle difference now whereby we've got 2 shapes on the left rather than 3. Now, some of these, again, can easily trip children up. Maybe if I do just go through them very quickly and just sort of share with you how to achieve the answer. So these 2 here, why are they similar? Well, the overlapping shapes, it's always got one black shape in the middle. So that one's got 3 white. This one's got the little one as the shaded one, so we can rule that one out. That one seems to fit the criteria. This one's got 2 bold shapes. We're going to rule that one out. And this one over here, the littler shape, the smaller shape, is always white in shading. So I can rule out that one. And that's my answer. The reason I've got this one in here was just to illustrate symmetry. And I'm going to actually get a line here and see whether I can draw it for you. So if we were to go through the horizontal, that is symmetrical. And that one is also symmetrical as well. So you've got a line of symmetry going through there. And most children, when we do this question, they often go for A, but need to realize that those are not actually symmetrical on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis there. So we would need to rule that one out. This one's got a subtle difference. There's a bold and a white, so we need to rule that one out. This one doesn't quite work because, again, they're not directly opposite in terms of symmetry. This one, though, seems to work really well. And if I grab my line, I can bring that line through there, you can see that would be symmetrical. And we can rule that one out because we've got the black and the white. Looking at this one very quickly, we've got a little circle that's underneath all of the corners, and we can rule that one out. That one's on top. That one's on top. We know that the shape inside is the same, so we must make sure that that happens. So that's why we can rule that one out. And because each of those little circles are on a corner, it can't be B because that one's kind of on the curved edge. So the answer is E. I do like this next one, and it has caught children out in the past, particularly when counting things up. If you were to add all of the edges up, you would get 9 of the shapes inside the circle. Okay, so we've got 3 triangles there, pentagon and a square. So we're looking for a shape that has 9. We can rule out some of the other ones where there are a lot more sides. And we're actually left with A because there's a hexagon and a triangle. And there also needs to be a shape with a line down through the middle of it. So again, you can see each time we're kind of applying a bit of a process to enable us to get to the answer. Let's move on now, I think, to another type of question. And we're going to look at odd one out. Now, this again is a very common question type within GL assessment. This is where they're given 5 shapes. One of them is different. We do look at it slightly in reverse because we tend to tell children to actually group shapes together rather than identifying the one that is different. So the principle behind this one is to look at all the shapes. If we just go through a sort of a series of stages here, see if you can find any similarities. Is there anything within those shapes or designs or figures that you say, actually, there's something similar about them? Once you've found that similarity, then it's about seeing if there is one that is different. This one does take a bit of careful observation because the shape that is on the outside, the little bold shape, is actually an overlap of the 2 bigger shapes. So just to show you, if I was to get this shape here, I could actually make it fit nicely in the overlap. This rectangle here, triangle here. Oh, that wasn't a very good drawing. Then we've got the rotated square. But if you look at this, and again, just to prove how subtle the differences can be, I've got a parallelogram here, but when I look at the overlap, it actually creates a trapezium. So if I was to pick that shape up and slot it into my gap, or where the 2 shapes overlap, actually it won't work. So the odd one out in this case is A. Now I thought it might be quite nice because I always find with odd ones out, they're just quite good fun to do. Wonder whether you could have a go at those questions. There are 4 there. I wonder whether you could work out for me which one you think is the odd one out. And then if you want to type your answers directly into the chat, please do. So find the one that is different. Thanks very much to those people who have put some answers in the chat already. Yeah, fantastic. Some good answers coming through. Well done, everyone. Oh, incredibly. So I've done all of them already. See if they are correct. Oh, could you? Yeah, someone. Yeah, great. Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for having a go at those. Hope this person doesn't mind me singling them out, but just because they've typed all the answers out, Mike, can you hear me, Mike?
Yes.
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
it's not Mike. It must be Mike's wife, is it?
Yes.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for doing those, Mum. Could you actually go through them with us quickly and just say, why you chose those answers?
Yeah, I think the first one is just the dot is equal to the length.
Yeah.
So it is the wrong answer.
Well done. Yeah, because obviously it's got 5 and 5, where we're looking for the dot to be one more than the number of sides. Brilliant.
Yeah, and 4, I think it's just the direction of the arrow is different from picture A.
Well done. Yeah. When we do see arrows, and we will always say this to children, do look at what they're pointing at, what direction or what are they actually looking at. I'd actually say, yeah, that probably is quite an easy question in some ways. But when they get a little bit more complex, it is worth saying to a child, right, if you see an arrow, what's it looking at? And that's quite important. Lovely. Thank you. Number 5.
Yeah, number 5, I think it's just the way the line connects the cross. It's only the C that's in the middle, the Y is incorrect.
Perfect. Well done. Yeah, just the way that those lines sort of, it's a bit like a sort of, I don't know, a railway line, and the way that the lines are linking up in their stations. And as you say, there's a kind of a cross in the middle, and it doesn't quite align with the plus signs on the other 2 circles. But yeah, brilliant. Well done. And then probably the last one is probably the hardest. What did you go for that one?
Actually, I'm quite confused about this one.
Oh, okay. No worries. Thank you so much. You did brilliantly on those. Is there anyone who'd like to have a go at number 6 and just sort of explain what they think the answer is? Just because your camera's on. Richard, any idea?
I can.
Okay,
Okay, so the answer was B. Because the arrow is always pointing to the black dot, while the others are, the dash is towards the black dot, while in B, the arrow is close to the black dot.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, exactly that. For those ones of you that didn't see that, if you look at so I'm just going to draw a little blue line there on that arrow, okay? So every time you see that arrow, usually it's pointing directly at the dashed line, okay? So if we put the dashed line as the green, there's the dashed line, there's the dashed line. So the arrow is always pointing at it. But if you look at B, dash line is on the other side. So if we were talking about our mnemonic, and again, this is what we would want the children to do, what part of the mnemonic did we use to achieve that as the answer? So what words would we be looking at from that mnemonic? Could anyone be brave enough to say which words we had to think about? Rena?
Position.
Oh, well done. Excellent. Yes, it is. It's position. It's where those shapes are positioned on the line. So if we were to go down through this very, very quickly and say, well, what did we use to get the answer? In this one, we use number, because it was the number of the dots compared to the number of lines. What do we use on this one? Well, we use position, because it was the position of the arrow. What did we use on this one? Well, it was really shape, because of the lines. What do we use on this one? We use position. So one little exercise, which you can always do with your children, which is quite a simple one, is in their books, when they've, if they've completed it or they've completed an exercise, get them to go back through each of the questions, particularly on something like odd one out or find the shape that's most alike, and get them to write down the word that they use to achieve the answer. Now, there will be occasions where they might need to write down more than one word, but it really gets them to make that link between what you want them to actually look for to achieve the answer. So if you haven't thought of doing that before, then that can be a really good exercise, particularly for those year 5 children in the summer months when they're kind of revising and they're going back over questions that they've already done. Get them to think about which part of their mnemonic they've actually applied. One of the reasons that we get children to use a pencil in their books, in their non-verbal books, is so they can rub it out, so that perhaps they could do those exercises again, or if you have got questions where they've made some mistakes, you can easily go through. For those ones of you where your child just accidentally maybe has used a pen, one of my colleagues says that one thing she used to do with her son when he went through the 11 plus is she'd go through the book and she'd actually circle all of them. And then the child wouldn't necessarily know which was the right answer, so they can do it again. So that could be another way of approaching it. Okay, let's move on to another question type, which we're going to talk about, which is analogies. Now, this can often be called connections, or it might be called complete the pair. And the idea behind these questions is children are looking for relationships. Now, if we look at this very simple example here, we've got this sort of basket shape and it turns into the second shape. So if we imagine this is the first to the second, third, and we've got to work out which is our fourth shape. But the way that we work it out is to understand what the relationship is between the first and the second shape. Now, what we would look at here is, well, the shape has been rotated, so it's gone 180 degrees. Therefore, I need to do the same with this shape. So the first thing to recognize is I need a square on the top. So if it hasn't got a square on the top, I'm actually going to eliminate it. I'm going to cross it out. Then if we come back, you'll see that when it was after it was rotated, we added an inner line. So on the sort of handle, if you like. So therefore, when we're going to rotate ours, we're going to end up having this shape like this, but then there's also going to be a shape on the inside. So you can see what I've actually drawn looks very similar to letter C. So we can rule out that one because it's kind of got 2 internal lines, and this one didn't have any extra lines at all. Children are allowed to draw the figure they think they will get. We wouldn't advise them to do that for every question because A, there isn't time to do that, but also you want the child really considering the answer without feeling actually every time I do an analogy, I'm going to have to draw what I think it's going to look like. And certainly the better children get at these questions, the more they can kind of visualize what those changes would be. Now, we have got a couple that we would like you to have a look at here. I think just because of time, I'm conscious we've already done an hour and I do want to get to the spatial reasoning with you. Perhaps if I could ask you just to look at those two and see if you can establish what the answer is. One of the differences here compared to the example is we don't just have one pair to consider the rule, we've actually got 2 pairs. So we need to understand what the relationship is and then apply it to our third pair. So just have a look at those guys, see if you can work them out. I think certainly on the first one, it's quite clear that some of them look very similar, but you just got to look quite carefully and just make sure that. Excellent, got some answers coming through, which is lovely. Thank you again for taking out time this afternoon to join me. I certainly find with these workshops that they are, and certainly time goes a lot quicker if you can participate, have a go at some of the questions, gives you a sense of what your child has to go through. We will be able to send these slides over to you as well early next week. So if you would like a copy of the slides, perhaps if you could just email the office on info@teachitright.com, we can send a copy of the slides over to you if you would like us to do that. We've got some different answers for the second one, which is interesting. So just have another look maybe at that one. Just make sure you're very sure about your reasoning behind that. Okay. Just have maybe another little look. Okay, shall we do a quick little look? Someone's got an answer for, or some of you have already put an answer for the first one in. So basically we've got a hexagon with another little black hexagon inside, and you can see that that is kind of duplicated on the top, and then underneath the black shape moves across to the other side. So we need to do exactly the same with our triangle. It also applies, of course, to the square. So this shape that we've got here is going to appear on the top. So if we can see that it doesn't appear on the top, we can rule it out. We've only got two options left now. Now, as I said earlier, that black triangle needs to shift over to the right-hand side. So the answer has to be A, because on D, they both appear on the same side. Now, maybe this one is a little bit more challenging. Let me just move it up a little bit and see whether we can actually have a closer look at this one. I'm going to make it slightly larger for us all, and then we can actually really see what's going on. So let's have a look at what happens on that first one. We've got this very large shape here, this large oval. Where does it go? Well, it actually goes down here, goes down to the bottom. Now, if we look at, we just want to double check that also applies to the second one, and it does. The square moves down there. So this sort of irregular hexagon that we've got here on the top must move to the bottom. So we want it down here somewhere, okay? Now, if we look at the options, that rules out B. So I'm sorry, those people that put B in the chat, not quite right, because we know we want the hexagon at the bottom. Now, that's only one thing that's gone on there. So we now need to come back and have a look at what else is happening. The little shape here, the triangle, that goes to the top. Then we've got the pentagon here, that also goes to the top. So we need this quadrilateral here, this sort of rhombus shape to go to the top. So in actual fact, they've all got that. So let's look at something else. We know with the times it comes plus, plus becomes times, times must become plus. So we can actually rule out that because this is a times sign here, times sign there, and I've only got one with the plus. It's got to be A. Sometimes when you are doing questions like that, and that sort of happened to me there, where actually I check something, but actually it doesn't help me achieve the answer. And it's saying to children, well, don't worry, be brave, go back to the question and see if you can find out what variables you need to look at. Don't get disheartened if you try something and it doesn't quite work out. And that's always my message to children on things like that. Okay, let's move swiftly on, I think, to have a look at a very common question type within sort of 2D nonverbal. Let's see if I can find them. Here we go. So one of the question types very much related to GL assessment. I'm not saying that CEM couldn't do these, but they tend not to do them. It's more a GL assessment question type. And these are code questions. Very good fun, I think, for children, because what we tend to talk about is breaking the code, working the code out. So let me just go through an example of a question, and then perhaps I can present some to you for you to have a go at yourself as well. The first thing we talk to children about is looking at the codes for each individual figure. And then it's about looking at the letters that represent those particular shapes. Now, in this instance, F and P stands for this sort of horizontal lined oval and a black dot. We've got G and Q representing a blank oval and a dot. HP standing for the horizontal lines and the black dot at the bottom. This is what we call our test shape. And this is the one that we've got to work out. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look along the top row. So I'm going to look along the top row and I'll notice that all of these letters are different. And I'm going to ask myself, well, why are they all different? What could they stand for? And what they represent is the position of that black dot. So the black dot is actually halfway down, which is the same as F. So the first letter for my code is F. Now, a very important thing here that a child can do once they've identified the first letter is to cross out the ones that are not F. So I know it's not A, I know it's not C, I also know it's not D. I'm down to 2. There are times, and this maybe is with the questions at the beginning of the section, where a child might do that and they've arrived at the answer. Lovely. Move on to the next question. And we are not in that position here because we've obviously got 2 answer options left. We've got B and we've got E. But if we go back to the question and we have a look now at the second letter, you will see that we've got a P and a P. Why are they similar? What's similar about them? Well, we're not looking at the dot anymore. We're now looking at the oval, and it's to do with the lines, the horizontal lines that we've got there. So if we look at our oval, it's actually a blank one, so I need a Q. So FQ is the code that I'm looking for, so the answer has to be B. How does this relate to our mnemonic? Well, it does hugely, because we had to look at position of the black dot. We also had to focus on shading, which was part of what we had to look at with the oval. So these codes need breaking. And I often say to children, right, we've got to try and break these codes. Can we try and achieve the answer? That was the series of steps that actually I just went through to answer this question here. But I've got a couple more that I would like you to have a go at. I think these are in your booklets, but if you would rather sort of do them on the screen, I am going to make them a little bit bigger because I think sometimes it's not always easy to see. And there are 3 there. I wondered whether you wouldn't mind having a go at. Again, if you're up for it, type them into the chat and we can break those codes. Always look for letters that are the same. You don't have to start with the top row. You might want to start with the bottom row. Children just need to be a little bit careful with that. They don't get confused what letters they're looking at, but certainly looking for letters that are the same is sometimes easier than saying, well, they're all different. What do they represent? You can, interestingly, in this one, you've got 4 shapes. On the other 2, you've only got 3 to break the code. So sometimes when there's more shapes, they're slightly easier to do. Fantastic. There's some good answers coming through, guys. Well done. Fantastic. Some of us are super quick this afternoon. Well done. Really good. Well done. Super. I think the other thing just to be conscious of, and we've highlighted it briefly, but I've not sort of talked a lot about it, but children do need to be aware of also how long they take with these kind of questions. I would say with the year 4 children, it isn't so important. It's all about developing their subject knowledge. Certainly with year 5, and certainly as we get further into the year, and certainly block 5 and 6 focuses on this a lot, children do need to consider their time management. They haven't got that long to work these questions out. There may be a question, particularly things like odd one out, where they just can't see it. Doesn't matter, choose an answer and move on to the next question. Get your marks elsewhere. We will talk certainly towards the end of the academic year in terms of around June and July about how children do need to manage their time, little tips and tricks around time management. But certainly when you're watching your child do their homework or you're working alongside them, do see how long they do take. That are there ways of them working out the answers potentially slightly quicker. Again, thank you very much to those people who have plotted some answers in the chat. Well done. There are some good, accurate answers going on here. And some of you very sensibly sort of, and I'm sorry I didn't do it, I've just numbered those now. So we are looking at 1, 2, and 3 there. Right, shall we have a go and see if we can work out the answers together? Who is feeling brave and who would like to start with number 1 and tell me the answer, but more importantly, how you got there? Don't all shout at once. Anyone fancy talking me through number 1? No? Okay. I'll go through them. If you think there's a had a slightly different answer and you're not quite sure why, then do shout. So first thing I would do on this number 1 is look at the 2 V's. And I'd say, well, why are they similar? We looked earlier, didn't we, at line style. You might remember we talked about different styles of line. And this is a bold line, okay, whereas W is a dash line. Now, when you actually have a look at that, you would say, well, actually, I need a W because I know that I've got a dash line there. If we then look at F, G, and H, we're actually focusing on the dot and the position of that dot. We actually need it, we actually need it in the middle of that line there. So we must have F. So the answer to that one will be WF. Going down to number 2, we've got KL and M. They're all different. Why are they all different? Well, they're actually, the lines are in different positions. So if we treat this as being at the top, we treat this as being at the bottom, this one being in the middle, we need it at the bottom. So we're going to have an L first of all. So I'm going to rule out that one, rule out that one, and rule out that one. If we look along the bottom, why have we got 2 G's? It's because of the direction of the slant. So the slanting line goes down like that. We need it to be going like that as well. So it's going to be like a TV, LG, TV, not that one. We've got D. Now, I haven't actually looked at this one yet, so I just need to sort of work it out as I go along. But F and F, if I were to look at those 2, I would say, okay, they're going diagonally that way. So they're going like that. G represents it going that way. H is kind of straight. Interesting, we need it to be H. Looking along the bottom, I'm going to be focused on my 2 T's, and that's because of the position of the black shape. So we know that we need it in the middle, so I'm going to need a U, so it will be HU, which will be C. I hope that all makes sense. If there was any questions about that or any one that you wanted me to go through again, do yelp. But again, you can see that so many of those words that we talked about at the beginning of this session apply in there. We talked about shading of the line. We talked about the position of the line. We talked about the type of shading on the bottom one there in terms of where it was positioned. And all these words become part of their lessons within Teach It Right. And you hear them say things like, oh, it's rotated, or the position of the shape has changed. And do encourage that language at home. And as I say, the more descriptive and the more accurate they can be with their language with nonverbal, actually, the more they start developing their understanding and certainly their reasoning skills. I did want to just highlight this to you. We won't worry too much about this question here. I'm actually going to delete that one, but I wanted to just draw your attention to something that GL Assessment started to do with code questions, which was not just have 2-letter codes, but actually have 3-letter codes. And obviously with questions like this, there's obviously a lot more to look at, but they were still requiring the students to do them in sort of 20 to 30 seconds. So it was an interesting thing that they did one year where the last sort of 5 questions within the code section, they made them all 3 letters. And children were a little bit surprised by this. It was like, oh, haven't seen them with 3 letters before. This is a variation that we're aware of, and we do select questions, some we've written ourselves, some that we use with other materials, where the children will have to practice it with 3 letters. So that was just to give you a bit of reassurance, really. Let's just have a quick look at this one, just so you can see how it kind of works with 3 letters. It's very similar. We look at the letters that are the same. So in this instance, we've got a J and a J. What do they stand for? Excuse me. Is a square on this side. The K is the circle. The L is the hexagon. We've got a circle on this side, so we know we need a K as the first letter. I'm actually going to cross out the ones that are not K. Now, unlike the other question, there's something we're going to do here which will save us a little bit of time. Both of these answer options have T as the middle letter. So we're not going to worry about working that out. We know it's a T. We're going to jump to the last letter, and then hopefully we can distinguish between an X and a Z. So we've got here, we've got 2 X's. Why are they similar, these 2 X's? Well, you might have noticed that the dot that they've got is on the outside. So it appears over here, or is sort of away from the other 2 shapes. The Z is the dot inside the square. The Y, the Z is because it's on the left-hand side. The Y is because it's on the right. We need it on the left-hand side, so hence why it will be a Z. So we can rule out X and we can go for E. So 3 letters, again, another variation that children would need to practice. I hope the 2D question types have made sense. There was only 2 that we, just because of time really, we haven't had a chance to go through, and that's matrices and sequences. They are very common. They are ones that we practice a lot at Teach It Right. So don't fret on that, on that part. But what we're going to do now, just to give us enough time, we are going to go and have a look at some spatial reasoning. So stick with me if you can. Again, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Hope you're finding it useful, and certainly with going through this number of questions, I appreciate it's a lot to cover in just a 2-hour period, but hopefully, as I say, it's giving you a bit of an insight into non-verbal reasoning and spatial reasoning. So we're going to have a look at hidden shapes now. For your children that have maybe done a CATS test at school, this is also a question type that comes up in CATS tests. It is very much related to GL assessment. We don't think CEM do anything quite like this. This is where they are given a shape to find. And again, for a lot of children, they do find these quite good fun to try and find out where that shape has been hidden. I always talk to the kids about being detectives. You're a detective and you've got to try and find out where that shape is. Are you a good enough detective to hunt that shape down? So we talk about a target shape being hidden. And again, if I just show you on the slides, if I just make this slightly bigger for you, this is what we call our target shape. Here it is. And then we're given 5 designs, and this shape is hidden in one of those designs. What is important to recognize here, in some of the questions, this target shape can be rotated. So it can be rotated. It's not flipped. It could only be rotated, but the size of the shape remains the same. Okay. Now, what will often happen with this style of question is they will hide lines inside to try and catch you out. But all the children need to consider is the outline of the shape. So they've got to find that outline within one of those designs. Whatever's happening inside doesn't matter. You know, if I had a line going this way, or I had a line going down here, a line going down there, it doesn't matter. All they've got to find is the outline, and that, of course, must be exactly the same. But it could be that they've rotated that target shape within one of those designs that they need to find. This one is quite a simple design in terms of it doesn't look particularly complicated. If I just rub out the actual shape, you've probably all spotted this is where it is. So we've got the outline here of that shape. And what they've done is they've added in a line here again to throw them off the scent. We can use elimination again. We can cross out the ones where it doesn't appear. And let's go and have a look at some examples. So here we are. I wonder whether you can all have a go at this one and see if you can find this shape within one of those designs. Do feel free to type your letter, one of the letters F, G, H, J, or K in the chat. And as I said, brilliant for CATS tests these. If a child does do a CATS test, this is one of the question types they set, but also GL assessment will also use it as well. Okay, we've got a couple of people who have put some answers in the chat. Well done. And let's see if we can outline where that one is. What we tend to say to children initially, do have a good look at that shape. Try and identify some sort of common features, if you like. And I would probably be looking very much at this sort of triangular bit at the bottom. And where can I find it? Well, it's not in that one. If I look here, there we are, there's that triangular bit, and that's exactly where it is. And if we keep going up here, in fact, I'm just going to rub that out a bit and just get another pen and just go through the outline with you. So we've got this bit going down here. There we are, that's that vertical line. Then it goes off diagonally down there, and then it goes down here, up the other side. And then we've got that long sort of horizontal line that meets up. And again, just going through that, you can obviously see that that shape will fit perfectly in there, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle in terms of linking it up. So well done if you managed to do that. I have just put a link into the chat, which is a familiarization booklet that GL Assessment produced, and it does share some examples of some of the questions that could appear within the 11 plus. So please do download it, do save it, because it's a very valuable document. If it does change for the next academic year, we will of course send you a more up-to-date version, but I doubt it will. GL tend not to produce a huge amount of material, because they're the 11 plus question writers, but they don't always reveal exactly all their styles of questions. But certainly here, that hidden shape there, hopefully you've managed to find. Just moving on quickly, just so we can highlight how these questions vary. This one, the designs are slightly more complicated. What we've got here is the shape doesn't rotate. It's actually hidden in U. If I go up there like that, and you could see again, if I was to pick that shape up, I could place it directly into that design there. This one I've included because I thought this one was slightly more difficult. And the reason I thought it was harder was because of the amount of lines that you've got going on in those designs. So actually picking it out, someone's saying they haven't got the link. Sorry, rather than link, I meant the actual document. So it was copied into the meeting. So hopefully I'll do it again just in case we haven't got it. Hopefully you're able to get that. So just having a look at this shape here, looks a little bit like a duck, I think. But where is it? It was actually hidden in L. Where is it? Let's see if I can draw it out for you. I'm sure some of you have spotted it already. So if I go along this horizontal line, there we go, horizontal line there. Go up the other side, up to the top. Now what we need to do here is come down that line because we need to go back a little bit, and that's that little line there. That's where I think some people may have found that slightly more challenging to find. And if we come down here, sorry, my pen is quite thick, but you can just about see how it finishes it off. And I thought that one was quite difficult because there are so many of these where there's a similar kind of shape going on, but it is about the whole outline of this shape actually being found. And certainly children are able to draw around it just so they can see exactly what's going on. None of those were rotated, but you can see how it can sort of go to another level when the children are expected to actually have to rotate that shape. And we will practice those with our students as we go through the year. So that's hidden shape. Hope that's given you a little bit of an overview of that one. We're now going to move on to, again, another very common question type within CATS test, but also the 11+ as well. It is a spatial reasoning one. This is called figure analysis. And what children have to do is imagine what happens when a piece of paper or a square bit of paper is folded and then it's punched. Now, one of the questions I often get asked is, how do we practice this one? Is there some way of doing it at home? Well, what we tend to suggest is to get squared paper. Generally, these are just like Post-it notes, and actually get a hole punch. And it's easier with the hole punch whereby it's just sort of one punched hole rather than the double one, and actually make the folds, punch the hole, open it out, and then have a look at what it looks like. And we will often do that in the lessons as well with the children when we do these, to actually get some squared paper and have a go at them, because just being able to visualize what happens when it's opened out. The more complicated these questions get, the more folds that are actually made and the more holes that are punched. So this is a very simple example here, and I'm sure you've all worked out very quickly what the answer is. But one of the things I want to just illustrate on these is how a child can actually draw what they think it's going to look like when it has been unfolded. So if we focus on this circle here, that's the only hole that's been punched. As it's only been punched once and only been folded once, we're going to get a mirror image of that circle up here. So that's what it's going to look like. Now, when there are more folds, you're kind of going to work backwards through those different folds, and on each one you would be able to draw in the circle so you would see what happens. The answer options, we know, again, we can apply elimination if we want to. It is important that children realize the direction of the fold as well, because in this example here you can see that if it was folded through the sort of vertical line rather than the horizontal, we would end up getting a different outcome. So again, we know it's not on the diagonal and we're left with B. I wanted to show you some more of these because I wanted to show you sort of how it can vary. One of the things that the students may experience is the holes not being circular, but using things like hearts, using things like triangles. So again, they get more complex in terms of thinking about things like symmetry and how they will actually look when they're unfolded. So let's go and have a little look, guys, at some maybe slightly harder ones. So I've got 3 for you to have a look at. I wonder whether you all could have a little go at that one. And again, if you'd like to have a go in the chat at what you think the answer will be. Do feel free to type the answer in the chat if you like. So guys, I did lose you there for a moment. Hopefully you are still with me. The connection did say it was lost, but it has come back. Okay, hopefully you've been able to answer that one. I think I've lost the lost the share. So I'm going to share my screen again with you. Sorry about that. It did seem like we dropped out for a little bit there. So let's just have a quick chat about this one. We've obviously got the series of circles on the different options. There's only 2 folds. So again, we would be able to draw in what we think is going to happen. One of the things that you would always kind of know is that where the hole is punched, then we know that that circle must exist on the answer options. In actual fact, they've got it on every single one. There it is. Okay, so it is worth children just quickly checking that, because there might be a one where it doesn't appear and they can immediately rule that one out. So just looking in the chat, seeing if we've got some answers here. So it's really important, of course, we get the kind of positions right. So we're going to fold backwards and we're going to go back to here. Now, if we're going to fold backwards to this edge here, we know we're going to end up having a circle that goes there. So again, it's worth looking. There isn't one here, look. So that one will be ruled out. We have got one there. There it is. Have got one there. Isn't one in B, and there is one in A. So again, able to rule out those answer options. Now, the next fold that we need to make is going to go right back to that corner there. So because we've made these 2 holes here, if you imagine those being sort of mirrored images, we're going to have one circle there. That's the mirror of this one. And then we're going to have the other one up in this top left-hand corner here. So we're looking for this and this. Unfortunately, with this one, there was only one. So I've already ruled that one out. Far too many circles going on there. So I'm going to rule out E. And then likewise with A, too many circles. We only need 4. So the answer is C. These I certainly do feel, if you can make these practical, they are a lot easier. But certainly in the exam, they wouldn't have a hole punch and a bit of paper. But certainly just visualizing what will happen when they do make those holes. Just a couple of seconds or so, see if you can work this one out. Okay, do feel free, guys, in the chat to just put an answer in there, and you'll be able to check and see whether you've got it right. So again, working your way through the different folds. So start sort of working backwards, if you like. So certainly on that first one, you're going to take it back to there. So you're going to think about, well, where would that hole end up being when I take it back there? Well, I'm bound to have one here, aren't I? Okay, and just thinking about where that would be. Also look at the direction, guys, of the fold as well. Some of you thinking about it not being diagonal. So just consider, look here, this is a diagonal fold there. Okay, so what would that look like if I'm taking this hole and I'm going diagonally back up? I'm not going to end up having it right at the top again. So just be careful with that. So in this instance here, we're going to end up having it whereby, because we've got this fold here, I'm just going to draw in a dotted line here so you can see it's kind of half there. And again, we're going to have it so it's going to be kind of symmetrical on the other side. So we're going to have one here, that's the sort of symmetrical one of here. But because we've punched this one and we're going right back to that top corner, we'd also have one here as well. So we'd end up getting 4 holes, okay? That one, not quite because of the 2 at the top there. This one's got too many holes in it. We wouldn't have this one down here, that wouldn't appear. And here, you're not going to get the 2 at the top. So we can rule out that one. So the answer to that one is B. Sometimes again, thank you for those ones of you that put B in the chat feed. Well done. I'm afraid it did say that our feed is getting a little bit unstable, so I hope we don't drop out again. But just to mention with those again, I would certainly impress on you to get your children a hole punch and maybe a bit of squared paper, and they can certainly have a go at those. Right, I think we should move on to another question type, which is very common within GL, which is cubes and nets. Often children do find one of these as certainly one of the harder question types. I think with these questions, the most important thing is to have a little bit of a process, a strategy to work them out. The idea behind them is that children are given a net, like this one on the left. They then fold it up and they've got to make one of those cubes. Certainly, again, we try and make them practical. So we actually use a magnetic cube with our students so they can draw the shapes on the faces. They can work out what happens when it folds up, what it looks like. But the starting point with questions like this is to talk about the shapes that would not touch each other. So I'm just going to represent this with a few different colors here. These 5 dots on this top face would not touch the grey face. So I can rule out A. The other thing to consider is shapes that don't even appear on the net that are used. Now, we've got this sort of Z shape here. Well, it actually appears twice on B, so I can remove that one. The other thing that we should be aware of is that this shape, the zigzag, can't touch this shape. So if they're next to each other, and as they are here, they're touching, we can rule that out. I've only got one left. Now, we also talk to students about how it will create a kind of an L shape. Now, I appreciate it's sort of an upside down L, but this here is the shape or the faces that can touch each other. And as you can see here, we've got the triangle on the top, the grey underneath, and then this stripy figure here. So that would be the answer. Again, just visualizing what will happen when these edges come together is really important. We do also need children to be aware of the different types of net that you can get. Now, there are 11 different styles here of net that you can actually have in cubes and nets questions. So there are lots of different variations, but there are 11 different ways of folding up the faces to make a cube. And we will expose children to those different types. The most common, though, is the one that we're looking at the moment, which is a T-shaped net. Okay, so this one here, this T-shaped net here, is the most common type. Okay. I thought it might be a good idea just to present a couple more to you here. Perhaps if I go through this again as a sort of a worked example, and then I'll put a couple up on the screen for you. Thank you again for coming along this afternoon. If it's, it is quite a long time, I appreciate, to be focusing on one particular topic. So we are fairly near the end. I will just share with you at the end of this workshop a couple of other games that certainly will develop non-verbal reasoning skills. And with Christmas on the horizon, this may well be something you want to look at in terms of what games and activities are out there to support my child's understanding of non-verbal. And I'll highlight some of those at the end. Let's just go through this example again, and then you can have a go at some cubes and nets. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the opposite faces. So this one cannot touch the divide sign. Is that anywhere? Yes, it is, there and there. So I'm going to rule that out. I've got the diagonal lines cannot touch this plain face here. So this diagonal lines cannot touch that one. They are touching there, look, so we can rule that one out. If we look at B, this could be okay because, again, we've got that kind of L shape. Why could it not be D? Let's just have a little look. Well, we're never going to have it whereby we've got all 3 faces in a line like that when they're actually offset on the actual cube. So that isn't going to be possible. We can't have all 3 faces in a line like that in order for it to fold up and look like that one. So we're going to rule that out. And then the answer has to be B. One of the other things that we want children to consider on these, particularly when they get a little bit more challenging, is the alignment. In other words, what shapes are pointing at other shapes? When you fold it up, will the shape be on the left? Will it be on the right? And say these can get a little bit more complicated. The more children practice these, certainly the better they will get. Let's just have a look at two together. And if you'd like to just have a look at those two, see if you can work them out. One of the things I have done on this one is I've actually given you one with a completely different net, but you can see it would still fold up and make a cube. So just two there, guys, for you to have a go at. I promise these are the last two I will make you do this afternoon. So look at the opposite faces, which ones would not touch each other, and then see if you can establish which one it will make. Brilliant. Thank you so much for having a go at these. Well done. Some good answers coming through the chat. Well done. Some different answers coming through the chat as well, which is fine. So if you just want to double check your understanding of, we're trying to find the cube that can be made from that net. So we fold up that net, which cube can it make? It can only make one of them, and it's just about establishing which one that will be. Okay. Right, everyone, shall we have a little, thank you so much for having a good go at these and trying them out. Let's see if we can go through. So first thing I'm going to look at is what I would describe as an alien. In other words, a shape which does not even appear on my net. And you probably noticed over here that there's a V. Well, there isn't even a V on my net. So I'm going to quickly eliminate that one. I'm then going to think about my opposites. So I'm going to think, well, this black shape here can't touch my stripy shape. So I'm going to remove that one. And then if we look carefully, the gray shape, the gray face, can't touch the W, but they're touching each other there. So actually I need to rule that one out as well. And a lot of you have gone with this as the right answer. You know it must be A. This slightly different looking net, again, we can look for any aliens. That would be our alien because we've got these sort of zigzag lines here twice. So they only appear once there. Then we're going to think, excuse me, we've got this sort of black arc here. Can't touch those lines. So we can rule out that option. And then this face here would never touch this face. Sorry, let me just do that in a slightly different color just to show you. This blank face here would not touch that one. So I'm going to rule out C. And as a lot of you went for, A has to be the right answer. Sometimes they're not as easy as that in terms of just eliminating them because of opposite faces. As I said, you may need to think about alignment, what shapes are pointing at other shapes, what would happen as the faces sort of move down, and they would rotate sort of 90 degrees as they move down the actual cube. And again, we will practice these thoroughly with your children. So the last thing I just wanted to just emphasize was the sort of games that can appear for non-verbal reasoning. They are a bit limited, I'm afraid. There aren't that many non-verbal reasoning games, but certainly just having some activities that can support their understanding and having a little bit of fun along the way. One of the games in the top corner here, Play to Pass, is actually a card game, which is fantastic. We actually stock those games. I don't think you can get it on the open market anymore. I don't think they're actually produced anymore. But Play to Pass is a non-verbal card game. It deals with things like codes, similarities, and it's really good fun to sort of play as a family. If you are interested in those, you can let us know. We can bring along to the centres. But Play to Pass was a game that was actually created by a lady called Alison Primrose. Now, Alison Primrose may not mean anything to you, but when I say to you, she's written all of the non-verbal bond books and certainly sold over 1 million of those, you would know exactly who she potentially is. She has created this game based on non-verbal, and in my again from my experience, I think it is probably the only card game which is on the market for non-verbal reasoning. I don't think there are many non-verbal reasoning card games out there. So Play to Pass may well be something that you're interested in. Again, just contact the office, let them know. We can easily even bring one for you to have a look at in the centres. Certainly with Christmas approaching, it might be something you want to put in your child's stocking. Set is another game that we actually use a lot in the classrooms. It's a visual perception game. It's to teach children about looking for different variables. It's good fun. It teaches them about shape, size, number, lots of different variables. And again, we use this probably more with our Year 4 students, but it is a nice way of introducing that mnemonic. Remember, that mnemonic is something that we're always talking to children about. So shape, position, angle, number, size, shading, rotation, overlapping, and symmetry. And if there's any way that we can sort of reinforce that, we will. I've also put down puzzles here, and you might think, well, puzzles are maybe a little bit young for children to do in sort of Year 4 and 5, but I don't think so. I think actually with puzzles, certainly when there's a number of pieces, 1,000 pieces or whatever, they can be really good for children to help them with sort of shading and shape and looking at sort of similarities, and all those skills are what we're trying to emphasize under that umbrella of non-verbal. I've also put Cubics down. This is a very popular game with our students. They absolutely love Cubics. Very good for rotation, symmetry, looking at things like reflection as well. And children can have great fun trying to mimic this sort of shape or pattern on a card and try and create it on their little boards. And if children do come home and say, oh, we played a game today, and they may well have played Cubics in the centres, because it is, again, great fun. Unfortunately, this game has been discontinued. I only found this out recently, but it's a game called Cognosis. You might be able to find it as a sort of a second-hand game, but this is a card game where they sort of a bit like Snakes and Ladders, where you have to sort of work your way up to the top. And it deals with non-verbal reasoning, but also verbal and numerical reasoning. But I'm sorry, I don't think that game is readily available. But if you are able to hunt it down, it's called Cognosis. So just some examples of some of the games and activities that are available to get. We use a lot of these within our sessions, so please don't feel you've got to go out and buy all of these things. We use them within our classes and certainly find them very useful. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I appreciate it's a long session and a lot to cover off, but I hope you have found it useful. If you are wanting to come along next weekend, we'll actually be looking more at CEM style questions. But we certainly managed to get through. So I can hear I've got a bit of a tickly throat this afternoon, but we managed to get through a lot of questions there. And thank you very much for participating as well and giving those questions a good go. I always like to end with, are there any questions? Is there anything else anyone would like to ask or understand about non-verbal? Please do feel free to chat, but thank you again for coming along and participating so freely as well. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll probably end it there. Look forward to seeing you soon, and thank you very much for coming along, and hopefully you'll be able to come along and join me we'll have a maths workshop in the new year, and also focus on English and exam technique as well. So do come and join me. I would appreciate it. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much for joining me this afternoon. Hope you found it useful. Thanks, Dev. Yeah, certainly something we will be obviously giving out in the next block, actually doing more non-verbal reasoning practice. So like to keep it contained within the books. But if there are any specific question types you feel you would like some worksheets on, then yeah, please do just drop me an email, and more than happy to send them over to you. Thanks. Thanks very much. Bye.